In this presentation, we're going to look at the humanistic approach to psychology. So this is one that's it's just found on the A level. Actual fact, I know that probably doesn't mean a great deal to you because you've only done the A level, but if you had done the AS, then you wouldn't have done this approach in year one. But we're going to look at the humanistic approach anyway, what it actually says, what its assumptions are, and what its problems are, shall we say. Okay, so the two main figures to remember in this area, it's sometimes easier really just to stick names on an approach. It helps you to remember certain things about the approach. And the two people here are Carl Rogers, the chap on the left with the glasses here, and Abraham Maslow. Okay, so these are the two main people that we need to remember the work of. So one of the big features that is different in this approach compared to others is the idea of free will. So in the other approaches, there was all manner of different types of determinism. That sort of concept which says that there are underlying structures or underlying processes going on which take away your ability to choose your actions. They might be genetic factors or sometimes social factors, but normally genetic of some sort. And the humanistic approach rejects that notion, and what it says is that actually we have free will. We choose to do what we want to do. We make our decisions, and our behaviour is completely down to these decisions that we make. And as such, we are active agents. Whilst we do have internal, external factors which do influences, we are ultimately responsible for our actions. So there is a kind of a refuting of the idea of determinism within the humanistic approach, and is very unique in that particular aspect, because all the other approaches, as I say, have some sort of determinism going on. Now, straight away, hopefully you can start thinking to yourself about evaluation here. If this is a topic area, an approach which just looks at free will, then how easy is it to actually be studied? You know, free will is all very well, isn't it? But actually, it makes it very, very, very difficult to actually study anything and to test the theories. So humanism, unfortunately, doesn't produce hypotheses which are easily testable because of that. The other side of the coin, of course, is free will fits very well into our concept of what it is to be a human, doesn't it? You know, so we've talked about this before, haven't we, with obedience and the obedience alibi, in that if we consider people are completely, you know, their behaviour is completely determined by underlying processes, then can they be ultimately responsible for their actions? Well, maybe not, but certainly in the humanistic approach, the idea of free will would suggest that they are, and that fits much better into certainly our legal processes in any country, but particularly ours, I guess, and also this concept that we have, that actually we feel that we do have free will, so it has quite a large amount of face validity, doesn't it? Okay, so leading on from that is the idea of a rejection of scientific models. Now, this is where people start having a few issues with the humanistic approach. So not only does it have this free will element that makes it very difficult for hypotheses to be generated from it, but also it says, well, actually, there's no point. There's no point doing any sort of scientific investigation of humans and their behaviours, because all humans are different, and they have subjective and unique experiences which don't stand up to general principles being laid over them, a nomothetic approach, if you will. Therefore, the only way in which you can study human beings is via an ideographical, person-centred approach, case studies and that sort of thing, and there's no point trying to bring up any general rules. a bit of a problem, really, that, isn't it? You know, again, if you have an idiographic approach, yep, you could have one person who demonstrates particular behaviours because of certain patterns of experiences in the past, etc. But that could just be that person. It doesn't really do anything to add to the body of psychological knowledge just to say that everyone is a unique individual. It doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, but it's certainly a limitation of the approach. So just something, again, worthwhile remembering when it comes to evaluating this area. Key term. So we talk about the idea of self-actualization. Now, as far as I know, an actualizing tendency has never actually been found in the brain. You know, unlike the biological approach, which has actually found different areas that relate to different sort of behaviours, an actualizing tendency hasn't been found, but it's a massive part of the humanistic approach, because what it says is that we have an innate drive within us, and that innate drive is called the actualizing tendency, and it helps us towards this process of self-actualization. And self-actualization is the notion that all of us are on a kind of like a journey, if you will, to achieve our true potential, no matter what that true potential actually is. You know, a lot of people misunderstand here that our true potential means that we can be anything we want to be. Not necessarily so. There are some people who are better set out to be marathon runners or sprinters or whatever, or college professors than others, but the principle of it is still the same. Whatever our true potential actually is, we have an actualizing tendency that drives us towards it. And once we've reached that, we have got to a self-actualization stage. Okay, but this happens along I would say a predictable pathway, but there are certain stations that have to be passed first in order for us to actually get to this point of self-actualization. So these lower level needs are the ones that have to be achieved first, and that's what we're going to go on to next. This should be something that you remember from when we did this in class. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Comes up in all manner of different subject areas, I believe, does this, but it is a psychological idea, and it talks about the fact that in order to reach self-actualization, this thing at the top, here you go, he's achieved his true potential, we need to have gone through these lower levels. These lower levels are sometimes called deficit needs. You don't necessarily have to remember that, but it's just bear that in mind. So in order to get to self-actualization, what do we need to do according to the theory? We need to have our physiological needs met. Okay, so physiological needs are things like sleep, eat, food, drink, those things that actually help to keep us alive. Can't self-actualize if you're not alive. Once we've had our physiological needs met, we've got enough food and drink to keep us going, and we've got somewhere to sleep, etc., then our safety needs need to be met. Okay, so are we safe? Do we have a place to go where we feel safe? Are we sheltered? All those sort of things. So you might say that someone who is homeless, say, might well have a lot of their physiological needs met, maybe, say they do, but maybe a lot of their safety needs aren't being met. Okay. Let's just assume that our safety needs are being met, and I assume that's the case for all of us, hopefully. Then we're able then to move on to our next set of needs, which are called our love and belonging needs. So we all, according to the approach, have a need to feel loved and to feel as if we belong in some way, whether that's in a group of friends or a family or whatever it happens to be. Okay, so once we've had our love and belonging needs met, okay, we all feel loved and we all feel that we belong, then we can start thinking about our esteem needs. And esteem needs are all about personal achievements, you know, so this could be a job, it could be basically things that make you feel good about yourself, essentially. So yeah, it could be promotions, it could be anything really. It could be gaining a degree, or whatever it happens to be. Once you've got your esteem needs met, okay, then you have a chance at reaching self-actualization. Okay, and self-actualization, like I said before, is that concept whereby we can reach our true potential. Now, just bear in mind that just as you can go up the old pyramid, you can just as easily come down. Okay, so you could well have self-actualized, and you could have, reached your true potential, and then suddenly someone comes in and says, "Well, actually, you don't own your house anymore. We're going to repossess it, and you've got nowhere to go. You've not had any savings or anything like that, and suddenly you're right down the bottom here. You could be out on the streets or whatever it happens to be." Okay, so just bear that in mind. You can go. Yeah, and as I've said there, the hierarchy of needs shows how each level must be achieved before we self-actualize. And what is self-actualization? It allows us to grow psychologically and is seen as an essential element of being human. It's funny that really, because how many people do self-actualize, but that's the whole purpose, according to the humanistic approach of life, really, that we can achieve this. But this is the big but here, really. Why is it that so many people don't reach self-actualization? Well, according to the approach, it is because of barriers that are placed in our way, and they prevent us from reaching our ultimate goal. So what are these barriers then that get put in the way? Okay, so the barriers to self-actualization then, well, according to Rogers, there are two things going on here. We have what he called our self-concept, and our self-concept is the way that we see ourselves. The way that we see ourselves is based on all manner of things, really. Feedback from our peers and our family, all those things whereby we've had information given to us from the outside world. It could also come from within as well, based on our personality. But all of those things, all our experiences, all the feedback we've had, they will mold our self-concept. And our self-concept is essentially who we think we are. What is our identity? What do we think our strengths and weaknesses are? Are we a bad or a good person? All those sort of things that are going on for us all the time. If someone was to say, "Tell me about yourself," you'd be telling them about your self-concepts. So that's the first of the ideas. The second idea is the idea of an ideal self. So we all have, again, according to Rogers, a notion of what our ideal self would be. Okay, so we've got all these comparisons going on in our head, which are, I am this type of person, this is my self-concept. But we know that we have deficits, we have areas that we can improve on. And if we improved all those deficits, we would have our ideal self. We would be the ideal version of ourselves. Okay, now there are some people who their ideal self is their self-concept. It's the same and the one thing. One and the same thing, same in a way. If that is the case, then those people are in a state of what Rogers would call congruence. If you have congruence, then you can self-actualize. You are your ideal self. You can self-actualize. You can reach your true potential. However, most of us are not in that position, and most of us have a significant gap. He called that significant gap an incongruence. So an incongruence is the opposite of a congruence, isn't it, really? In that there is a significant gap there between our self-concept and our ideal self. As such, we can't self-actualize. What can cause this significant gap? Feelings of low self-worth. They come about via this process of incongruence. So when we feel this gap, when we actually sense it, then that in itself is enough to bring about this low self-worth, and we find it difficult to have our esteem needs. Right, so where does this incongruence come from then? Again, we're blaming parents again. Rogers said that they have their roots in childhood, and we have the idea here of conditions of worth. Okay, so a condition of worth is anything which has been said to you, done to you, etc., which gives an indication that you are only acceptable if you do certain things, and you are not acceptable if you do other things. Those other things that you might do which are unacceptable might be part of who you are. You know, that's your self-concept. As such, these conditions of worth are setting up the idea of the ideal self, and are also telling you just how far away you are from achieving it, so an incongruence. According to Rogers, parents are not giving you what he called unconditional positive regard, okay, which is essentially you're all right by me no matter what you do. Okay, and if you achieve that, if parents give you that, according to Rogers, then you don't have any conditions of worth. What he said was we introject these conditions of worth. That's just another phrase for you. You can use it if you want to, doesn't matter, but we have the conditions of worth anyway. Okay, I've written it on the next slide here, haven't I? So children will take these conditions of worth on board in a process called introjection. So I put here, I will only receive positive regard if I behave in a certain way. Become part of the self-concept and lead to incongruence between the two selves. Okay, so that's basically at the heart of what Rogers was saying about what causes mental anguish and what causes people to seek help. And this is kind of the embryo for person-centered counselling. So how do we overcome barriers to self-actualization? Well, according to Rogers, talking therapy is the way. And talking therapy that Rogers put forward was something called client-centered counselling. That's actually what's written in the spec. It's not been called that for a long time. It's been called person-centered counselling. But anyway, that's what you need to remember. So client-centered counselling is fine for our purposes. What happens in client-centered counselling? Well, the therapist has to provide 3 what we call core conditions, which are genuineness. So they have to be absolutely honest and straightforward with the person, and they're not putting on an act. You know, they have to give empathy, so they have to demonstrate an understanding of what it's like to be that person. And then unconditional positive regard, so that thing which they didn't get as a child. So the aim there is to increase those feelings of self-worth and reduce the incongruence, because obviously if you reduce the incongruence, then you've got a chance of self-actualization. Right, so quite a lot to humanism really, isn't it? Although it seems quite a strange theory in many respects, there's a lot you can write about. So what's good and bad about it? We've already talked about quite a lot of this stuff already, and there's bits that I haven't included here which you can no doubt include based on what we've talked about before. But the one thing that's really good, I suppose, about humanistic approach is it's non-reductionist. It's a holistic approach. It looks at the whole person, which, let's be honest, when you actually think about psychology and what we've learned before, trying to break something down into just really sort of like small stimulus response units, saying behaviorism or genetics in the biological approach, is that a particularly valid way to look at people in a real life context? Maybe not, and perhaps humanism has got something going for it in that respect, because it has a holistic approach. It looks at the whole person, so that's a good thing about humanism. The humanistic approach is very positive. If you think about the psychodynamic approach, which is very, very bleak about people, it says, we are incredibly self-centered individuals who are just looking out for our own pleasure, really. The humanistic approach takes a very, very different stance on it altogether. It says that humans are basically good, and that we are free to achieve our potential. Now that's kind of a welcome break from a lot of the negativity that you get in psychology. Some people, though, of course, so you can't knock them for this, I guess, they say that actually it's too optimistic about humans, really. It misses an awful lot of the underlying selfishness that humans have. So whilst it's good, you can also however that and have a, well, maybe it's a little bit too optimistic about as well. One of the problems that this approach has is the lack of a comprehensive theory. So whilst it's had an absolutely massive impact on psychological counselling, it hasn't had the same impact on psychological theory, and the reason being is the evidence base is not really there. You know, Rogers and other humanists reject the idea, don't they, of the scientific basis for evidence. So it's very difficult to get a sound evidence base here, and as such, the impact it's had on psychological theory has been limited. Now, I've only put a few evaluation points here, but as we've been going through this, hopefully you've picked up a few others. You know, ideas of determinism and free will. You might even think about nature versus nurture there. Another way to evaluate this is to compare it to another one. Okay, so are there other approaches that do a better job? So you could compare it perhaps to the biological approach here, which is based very much on a sound evidence base and has therefore had a much greater impact on psychological theory. So you can flesh out and add to these evaluation points very, very easily just by thinking about some of the other things that you've learned and the things that we've talked about in the AO1. I've just provided you with 3 very straightforward ones here. Okay, well, that's it for the humanistic approach. If there is any other issues that you want to discuss regarding this, if you have any questions about it, do let me know.